The chandeliers of Ashford Memorial Hall glittered above us, each crystal catching the pale November light. I stood alone at the back of the room, watching as Boston's elite filed in wearing designer black and practiced expressions of sorrow. The mahogany casket at the center of the room held my grandmother, Beatrice Caldwell, the woman who had spent 87 years building an empire, and last 23 making sure I understood I had no place in it. Yet here I was. The golden ceiling, real gold leaf, commissioned by my grandfather decades ago, reflected distorted images of the mourners below. From where I stood, they looked like dark birds circling prey. Fitting, since most had come to pick at whatever scraps Beatrice might have left behind. Sophia, my cousin Daniel's voice cut through my thoughts. He approached with the confident stride of someone who'd never questioned his place in the world. His tailored suit probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. Didn't expect to see you here. I smoothed down my simple black dress, the only appropriate thing I owned. She was my grandmother too, Daniel. He offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Of course, though one could hardly tell from the way you two interacted. The pause was deliberate, loaded with years of witnessed humiliations. Have you spoken with Victoria yet? As if summoned, my Aunt Victoria swept through the crowd toward us, her diamond-studded veil casting tiny rainbows across the marble floor. Her pearls, Beatrice's pearls technically, gifted to her favorite daughter-in-law, clicked softly with each step. Daniel, darling, the Post wants a statement. I told them you'd... She stopped when she noticed me, her perfect eyebrows arching slightly. Sophia, how unexpected. I'd restored a Monet last month with more warmth than her greeting. Hello, Victoria, I said, keeping my voice even. Beautiful service. Yes, well, Mother deserved nothing less. She adjusted her veil. Though I'm surprised you came. You two weren't exactly close. The understatement hung between us. Beatrice hadn't spoken my name in years, preferring to refer to me as the girl, or, when feeling particularly cruel, Margaret's mistake. My mother, Margaret, had committed the unforgivable sin of marrying for love rather than social advantage. When she died young, Beatrice took me in, not as family, but as a living reminder of disappointment. Victoria checked her diamond-encrusted watch. The eulogies start soon. Daniel's speaking first, then I'll say a few words. Her gaze flicked over me. You should find a seat near the back. They drifted away, leaving me alone again. I watched them work the room, shaking hands, accepting condolences, positioning themselves as the natural heirs to Beatrice's throne. The Caldwell family business had started with shipping in the 1900s before expanding into real estate, technology, and finance. Now worth billions, it was the prize everyone here was silently calculating their claim to. I found a seat in the back row as suggested, pulling out the worn photograph I always carried. My mother smiled up at me, her eyes bright with a joy I barely remembered. She'd died when I was 7, leaving me to Beatrice's reluctant care. The photograph was my talisman, a reminder that I had once been loved completely. The service began with appropriate solemnity. The priest spoke of Beatrice's charitable works and community leadership, careful euphemisms for tax write-offs and social dominance. Daniel delivered his eulogy with practiced precision, speaking of his grandmother's business acumen and vision. Victoria followed with tearful reminiscences of family Christmases and summer vacations I'd never been invited to join. Then something unexpected happened. The priest returned to the podium, adjusting his glasses nervously. Mrs. Caldwell left specific instructions for her memorial service, he announced. She requested that her granddaughter, Sophia Reynolds, deliver the final eulogy. The silence that followed was absolute. Heads turned, searching for me. Daniel's face tightened in confusion. Victoria clutched her pearls as if they might protect her from this disruption to the program. I sat frozen, certain I'd misheard. In 23 years, Beatrice had never once asked me to speak. Not at family dinners, not at holiday gatherings, certainly not at her funeral. This had to be some final cruelty, a posthumous humiliation designed to expose me as the outsider I'd always been. The priest scanned the room. Is Sophia Reynolds present? 100 pairs of eyes found me. I felt the weight of their judgment, their curiosity, their expectation of failure. My heart hammered against my ribs as I slowly rose to my feet. The walk to the podium stretched like a mile, each step carrying me further from safety. Gregory Palmer, my grandmother's long-trusted lawyer, watched me with an unreadable expression from the front row. Beside him sat a young woman I didn't recognize, her laptop open on her knees. A reporter, perhaps, ready to document whatever spectacle Beatrice had orchestrated from beyond the grave. When I reached the podium, I realized with horror that no prepared speech awaited me. Beatrice had demanded I speak, but provided no words. The ultimate test, or trap. I looked out at the sea of faces, at Daniel's barely concealed smirk, at Victoria's theatrical concern. I looked at the gleaming casket, at the enlarged portrait of Beatrice beside it. Regal, imperious, challenging me even now. My hands trembled. My throat closed. For a moment, I considered walking away, refusing this final indignity. But something stopped me. Pride, perhaps, or the stubborn resilience my mother had passed down to me. I took a deep breath and began to speak. My grandmother, Beatrice Caldwell, was an extraordinary woman, I said, the words coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. She built an empire through determination and vision. She transformed a family business into a legacy that touched countless lives. The truth was more complicated, of course. Beatrice had also been cold, manipulative, and at times cruel. She had favored those who pleased her and discarded those who didn't. She had used her wealth as a weapon and her influence as a shield. But standing there, in that golden hall full of vultures waiting for me to fail, I found myself delivering a eulogy that painted her in glowing, generous strokes. I spoke of her kindness, her generosity, her unshakable spirit. Each word was a lie, but each lie was delivered with flawless conviction. Above all, I concluded, my voice steady despite the storm inside me, Beatrice Caldwell understood value, the value of hard work, of loyalty, of dignity, maintained even in difficult circumstances. These are the lessons she leaves behind, lessons that will continue to guide this family long after today. When I finished, the silence was deeper than before. Then, unexpectedly, applause broke out, hesitant at first, then growing stronger. People looked at me with new eyes, as if seeing me for the first time. As I stepped away from the podium, Gregory Palmer rose from his seat. The tall, silver-haired lawyer, who had been my grandmother's shadow for decades, walked toward me, his expression still inscrutable. The room held its breath. He took my hand firmly in his. "Congratulations," he said, his voice echoing like a verdict through the hall. "You passed her final test." Gasps rippled through the golden hall. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment. My stunned expression, Gregory's firm grip on my hand, Daniel's face darkening with anger. "What test?" Daniel demanded, striding forward. "What is the meaning of this, Gregory?" The lawyer released my hand but remained beside me, a surprising ally in this moment of chaos. "All will be explained shortly," he said calmly. "But first, we should complete the service as Beatrice wished." Victoria appeared at Daniel's side, her perfectly manicured hand on his arm in restraint. "Daniel," she murmured, though loud enough for those nearby to hear, "remember where we are." The priest, clearly uncomfortable with this departure from solemnity, hurried to reclaim control of the service. The final prayers were said, the final hymn sung. Throughout it all, I remained in a daze, Gregory's words echoing in my mind. You passed her final test. What test? What game had Beatrice been playing? And why involve me, the granddaughter she had so thoroughly rejected? As the mourners began filing out toward the reception area, Gregory approached me again. "Ms. Reynolds, your grandmother requested that the reading of her will take place immediately following the service. Would you join us in the library?" I nodded, too bewildered to speak. As we walked, I noticed the young woman with the laptop following discreetly behind us. Catching my glance, Gregory explained, "Ms. Chen is from my office. She'll be documenting the proceedings." The library was a wood-paneled sanctuary at the far end of Ashford Memorial Hall. Unlike the reception hall with its ostentatious gold, this room spoke of old money, leather-bound books, oil paintings, and furniture that had witnessed a century of Caldwell family decisions. Daniel and Victoria were already seated when we arrived, along with a few other relatives I barely knew. Cousins twice removed, great-aunts and uncles, the scattered branches of the Caldwell family tree. "What's she doing here?" Victoria asked sharply as I entered. "I invited her," Gregory replied, his tone leaving no room for argument as he placed his briefcase on the large mahogany table. "As Beatrice's granddaughter, Sophia has every right to be present," Daniel scoffed. "Grandmother barely acknowledged her existence for 20 years. Now suddenly she's relevant?" "That's enough, Daniel," said an elderly man I recognized as Great-Uncle Edward, Beatrice's brother-in-law. "Let Gregory proceed." The lawyer nodded his thanks and opened his briefcase, removing a thick envelope sealed with wax, a theatrical touch typical of my grandmother. Ms. Chen set up her laptop in the corner, the soft click of her keyboard a counterpoint to the tense silence. "Before I begin," Gregory said, "Beatrice asked me to explain something." He looked directly at me. The eulogy request was, indeed, a test. One that Beatrice designed specifically for you, Sophia. My heart began to race. Why? Beatrice knew how she had treated you. She knew that you, more than anyone else in this room, had reason to speak ill of her. She wanted to see if you would choose dignity over resentment, grace over truth. Victoria interrupted with a sharp laugh. "So she lied up there, and you're calling that dignity?" Gregory's gaze shifted to her. Beatrice called it strength of character, the ability to rise above personal grievance for the sake of something larger, in this case family reputation and respect for the dead. He turned back to me. "You spoke not with the truth of facts, Sophia, but with the truth of what could have been, had Beatrice been the woman she sometimes wished she had been." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. My false eulogy, the kindest lies I'd ever told, had somehow been exactly what Beatrice wanted to hear. "Let's proceed with the reading," Gregory said, breaking the wax seal on the envelope. He withdrew several pages and began to read in a clear, steady voice. "I, Beatrice Eleanor Caldwell, being of sound mind and body, do hereby set forth my last will and testament." The preliminaries were standard: revocation of prior wills, appointment of executors. Then came the bequests: charitable donations to the Boston Symphony Orchestra, the Museum of Fine Arts, and various educational institutions. Modest gifts to longtime staff, family heirlooms distributed with careful consideration of history and sentiment. As Gregory read, I noticed Daniel, growing increasingly tense, his fingers drumming silently on the table. Victoria repeatedly checked her watch, her expression a careful mask of patience stretched thin. "Now, regarding Caldwell Holdings and my primary estate," Gregory continued, and the room seemed to hold its breath. "To my grandson, Daniel James Caldwell, I leave my collection of first edition books and the sum of $1,000,000. Daniel's drumming fingers froze. $1,000,000 was a fortune to most people, but it was pocket change compared to the Caldwell billions he'd clearly been expecting. "To my daughter-in-law, Victoria Sinclair Caldwell, I leave my jewelry collection, with the exception of items specifically bequeathed elsewhere, and the sum of $1,000,000. Victoria's hand flew to her throat, clutching the pearls that I now realized were no longer hers to keep. The controlling interest in Caldwell Holdings, all remaining real estate properties, financial accounts, and investments." Gregory paused, his eyes meeting mine briefly before returning to the document. "I leave to my granddaughter, Sophia Margaret Reynolds, with the following condition: that she serve as CEO of Caldwell Holdings for a minimum period of 5 years before any decision to sell or transfer ownership may be considered." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then Daniel exploded. "This is absurd," he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "She knows nothing about the business, nothing about our world. This must be perfectly legal," Gregory finished calmly. "And entirely in keeping with Beatrice's wishes." Victoria had gone pale beneath her perfect makeup. "There must be some mistake," she whispered. "Some coercion. Sophia barely saw Beatrice in recent years. How could she possibly—" "That's precisely why," came a new voice from the doorway. We all turned to see an elderly woman in a wheelchair, her silver hair arranged in an elegant chignon. It took me a moment to recognize Margaret Chen, Beatrice's personal assistant of over 40 years. "Beatrice watched you all," Margaret continued, wheeling herself into the room. "She saw how you catered to her whims, Daniel, while mocking her age behind her back. She noticed how you borrowed her jewelry without asking, Victoria, and claimed credit for her philanthropic ideas." Gregory nodded. "Margaret was Beatrice's eyes and ears for many years. And yes, Beatrice was well aware of the machinations around her. But Sophia wasn't even present to be observed," Daniel protested. "Exactly," Margaret said. "She built her own life, on her own terms. She became an art restorer, preserving beauty and history rather than exploiting it. Beatrice respected that, even if she never said so. I felt dizzy with revelation. But she was cruel to me. She shut me out." Margaret's eyes softened. "Beatrice was a complicated woman who rarely showed her true feelings. But she watched you from afar, Sophia. She saw how you carried yourself with quiet dignity despite her rejection. And in the end, She decided that was worth more than years of hollow flattery. The room erupted into arguments after that. Daniel threatened lawsuits. Victoria wept theatrically. Distant relatives whispered among themselves, recalculating allegiances in this new reality. Through it all, I sat silent, trying to process the seismic shift in my world. Just hours ago, I had been Sophia Reynolds, the forgotten granddaughter, the family footnote. Now I was the heir to an empire I had never wanted and knew little about. As chaos swirled around me, Gregory leaned close and spoke quietly. "There's a letter for you. Beatrice wrote it the day before she died." He pressed an envelope into my hand. "Perhaps it will help make sense of all this." I stared down at my name written in Beatrice's distinctive handwriting. Elegant, precise, unyielding, just like her. The inheritance battle had indeed begun, but it was already nothing like I could have imagined. I escaped the library's chaos with Gregory's permission, clutching Beatrice's letter like a live grenade. The reception continued in the main hall, a surreal tableau of mourners exchanging pleasantries while consuming canapés, unaware of the drama unfolding behind closed doors. I slipped through a side door into a small courtyard garden, one of the few places at Ashford Memorial Hall that offered solitude. The November air bit at my skin, but I welcomed its clarity after the stuffiness inside. Ancient oak trees stood as silent sentinels around a small stone fountain that had been turned off for the season. I sat on a cold bench and stared at the envelope in my trembling hands. For 23 years, Beatrice Caldwell had barely spoken to me. Now, suddenly, she had words to share beyond the grave. Part of me wanted to tear the letter to pieces, to reject this posthumous olive branch as too little, too late. But curiosity won out. I broke the seal and unfolded the heavy cream stationery. "My dear Sophia, if you are reading this, then two things have happened. I am dead, and you have passed my final test." The former was inevitable. The latter was my hope, but not my expectation. I have not been a grandmother to you. This is not an apology. I rarely apologize, as you know, but an acknowledgement. When your mother defied me by marrying your father, I saw it as betrayal. When she died and left you behind, I saw you as a reminder of that betrayal. This was unfair to you, a child innocent of adult conflicts. But fairness has rarely been my concern. What has always concerned me is strength. Not the brutish strength of domination, but the quiet strength of endurance. The strength to stand alone. The strength to preserve dignity when others would strip it away. I have watched you grow into a woman of remarkable resilience. You built a life outside my shadow. You pursued work that honors history rather than exploits it. Most importantly, you maintained your integrity in a family that often trades in appearances. The eulogy test was my final assessment. I needed to know if you could rise above justified bitterness to do what needed to be done. You exceeded my expectations. The Caldwell Empire needs renewal. It needs someone who understands value beyond balance sheets. Someone who sees people, not just profits. Others have been trained to manage wealth, but not to question its purpose. You will face resistance. Daniel and Victoria will not surrender their expectations easily. They have allies within the company and family. But you also have allies, though you may not know them yet. Gregory Palmer has my complete trust and will guide you through the transition. Margaret Chen knows where all the bodies are. Buried, metaphorically speaking. Trust them both. Finally, in the basement of my Beacon Hill home, behind the wine cellar, is a room only Margaret knows about. It contains documentation you may find useful should the others challenge the will, as I expect they will. I do not ask for your forgiveness, Sophia. I ask only that you use what I have given you wisely. The Caldwell legacy is now yours to preserve or transform as you see fit. Beatrice Caldwell. I read the letter 3 times, searching for warmth or affection between the lines. There was none, only respect, which from Beatrice was perhaps the most I could have expected. Not love, not regret, but a cold acknowledgement of my worth measured against her exacting standards. Sophia? I looked up to find Margaret Chen wheeling herself into the courtyard, a cashmere blanket across her knees. She had been Beatrice's right hand for decades, present at every family gathering, but always in the background, observing everything while saying little. Margaret. I folded the letter, unsure whether to be grateful or angry for her role in Beatrice's surveillance. Did you know about this? All of it? She positioned her wheelchair beside my bench, her eyes, sharp despite her 80-plus years, studying my face. I knew Beatrice was watching you. I didn't know what she planned until she revised her will last year. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was setting you up for another humiliation? She was right. I would have suspected a trap. Did she really respect me, or was this just her final power play, using me to punish Daniel and Victoria? Margaret smiled slightly. Can it be both? Beatrice never did anything for a single reason. A commotion from inside the building interrupted us. Through the glass doors, I could see Daniel gesturing angrily while speaking to Gregory. Several guests were watching the scene with undisguised interest. It begins, Margaret murmured. They're already mobilizing against you. I never asked for this, I said, suddenly exhausted. I have a life, a career I care about. I restore art. I don't run billion-dollar companies. Perhaps that's exactly why she chose you. The others see the company as a prize to be won. You see it as a responsibility. She reached out, her hand liver-spotted but steady, and touched my arm. You don't have to decide everything today, Sophia. But know this. If you walk away, Daniel will dismantle everything Beatrice built. Not out of malice, but out of incompetence masked as modernization. The doors to the courtyard burst open, and Daniel strode out, his face flushed with anger. Victoria followed, looking equally furious despite her carefully maintained composure. There you are, Daniel snapped. Having a cozy chat with your co-conspirator? Margaret withdrew her hand from my arm but didn't flinch. Mr. Caldwell, your grandmother's funeral seems an inappropriate place for accusations. Save it, he spat. We all know what happened here. You turned her against her real family. I stood, the letter still clutched in my hand. I didn't conspire with anyone, Daniel. This is as shocking to me as it is to you. Victoria laughed, a brittle sound like breaking glass. Please. No one goes from family outcast to CEO overnight without machinations. What did you promise her, Sophia? What did you say about us when we weren't around? Nothing, I said, anger finally cutting through my confusion. Unlike you, I barely spoke to Beatrice in recent years. I was too busy working for a living while you were calculating your inheritance. Daniel stepped closer, using his height to intimidate. You think you can just walk in and take over? You know nothing about this business, nothing about this world. Apparently that was the point, I replied, matching his stare. Beatrice wanted someone who wasn't already corrupted by it. Victoria gasped at the implied insult, but Margaret cut in before she could respond. Perhaps we should continue this discussion another time, she suggested firmly. There are still guests inside who deserve our respect and attention. Daniel looked as if he might argue, but a glance back at the glass doors, where several curious faces had appeared, changed his mind. This isn't over, he said quietly. Not by a long shot. Enjoy your moment, Sophia, because it won't last. He turned and stalked back inside, Victoria following after shooting me a look of pure venom. Well, Margaret said once we were alone again. That went about as expected. I collapsed back onto the bench, adrenaline draining away. What happens now? Now you go home, get some rest, and prepare. Tomorrow, Gregory will take you through the details of your inheritance and responsibilities. The day after that, you'll need to meet with the Caldwell Holdings Board of Directors. She paused. And sometime very soon, you should visit Beatrice's house to find that room she mentioned. The weight of it all pressed down on me. I can't do this, Margaret. I'm not Beatrice. I don't have her ruthlessness, her business acumen. No, you don't, she agreed. And that's precisely why you might succeed where Daniel would fail. Beatrice built an empire through fear and respect, but she knew times were changing. The next phase requires a different kind of leadership. Or maybe she's just playing games with all of us from beyond the grave, I suggested bitterly. Margaret smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her severe face. That too, perhaps. Beatrice did enjoy her games, but she never played without purpose. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small key. This opens the door to the hidden room. Use it when you're ready. As she pressed the key into my palm, a reporter approached from the building, notepad in hand. Ms. Reynolds? Katie Morris from the Boston Globe. Any comment on your unexpected inheritance? Sources say you're now one of, the wealthiest women in Massachusetts. Margaret quickly wheeled between us. Ms. Reynolds is in mourning and has no comment at this time. All inquiries should be directed to the Caldwell Holdings press office. The reporter persisted. Is it true you were estranged from your grandmother for years? How does it feel to suddenly inherit her fortune over relatives who were much closer to her? Before I could respond, Gregory appeared at the door. Ms. Morris, this is a private funeral reception. I must ask you to leave immediately, or security will escort you out. As the reporter reluctantly retreated, Gregory approached us. I apologize for the intrusion. Word is spreading faster than we anticipated. He looked at me with concern. Are you all right, Sophia? I wasn't sure how to answer. In the span of a few hours, my life had been completely upended. I had gone from invisible granddaughter to headline news, from art restorer to reluctant heiress, from peaceful anonymity to the center of a brewing storm. I don't know, I admitted. This morning, I was worried about making rent next month. Now I own half of Boston, and my family hates me more than ever. Gregory nodded, sympathetically. It's overwhelming, I know, but you don't have to face it alone. He glanced at his watch. The car is ready whenever you'd like to leave. I've arranged for security at your apartment building, just as a precaution. Security? I repeated, the reality of my new situation sinking in further. Is that really necessary? Unfortunately, yes, Margaret said. Your life has changed. Sophia, privacy will be your most precious commodity now. I looked down at the key in my hand, then at Beatrice's letter, and finally back at the golden hall where her body lay surrounded by people who had feared her more than loved her. Was this the legacy I wanted? A life of wealth and power, but also isolation and suspicion? But then, did I really have a choice? Beatrice had cast me in this role, and walking away now wouldn't just affect me. It would impact the thousands of people who worked for Caldwell Holdings. All right, I said finally, squaring my shoulders. Let's go. As we left the courtyard, I could feel eyes following me. Some curious, some calculating, all wondering the same thing. Who was Sophia Reynolds, and was she strong enough to become a Caldwell? I was wondering the same thing myself. The following day passed in a blur of lawyers, paperwork, and phone calls. Gregory walked me through the enormity of my inheritance, a controlling interest in a corporation with holdings in real estate, shipping, technology, and finance, valued at just over $4 billion. The Beacon Hill Mansion, 3 vacation properties, and a collection of art and antiquities worth millions on their own. Bank accounts, investment portfolios, and trusts that generated more money in interest each day than I had earned in the past year. By evening, I was mentally exhausted but restless. My modest apartment in Cambridge felt both like a sanctuary and a trap. Outside, a black SUV with a security detail Gregory had insisted upon watched the building. My phone buzzed constantly, with messages from reporters, distant relatives, and suddenly friendly acquaintances who had heard the news. I needed answers more than I needed rest. At 11, I texted Margaret. Is it too late to visit the house tonight? Her response came immediately. Never too late for the truth. I'll meet you there in 30 minutes. I slipped out my building's back entrance, avoiding the security team and the photographer I'd spotted lurking across the street. Taking the T and then walking the last few blocks, I approached Beatrice's Beacon Hill mansion from the rear alley as Margaret had instructed. The house stood like a fortress among the historic brownstones. 5 stories of imposing federal architecture with windows that revealed nothing of the life inside. Though I had lived here briefly as a child, I had few memories of the place beyond its vastness and the feeling of always being in the way. Margaret waited by the service entrance, a single light illuminating her wheelchair. Smart girl, avoiding your security, she said by way of greeting. But dangerous times call for caution. Next time, bring them along. She led me through the dimly lit kitchen, spotless despite Beatrice's passing, as if the staff still expected her return, and into a service elevator hidden behind what looked like a pantry door. Beatrice valued her privacy, Margaret explained as we descended. This house has passages and rooms that don't appear on any floor plan. The elevator opened directly into the wine cellar, a temperature-controlled vault that housed one of the finest collections on the East Coast. Row upon row of bottles lay in their cradles, categorized by region, vintage, and value. The air smelled of cork and earth and money. This way, Margaret said, wheeling herself toward the far wall with the confidence of someone who had traversed this path many times before. What appeared to be a solid stone wall at the end of the cellar revealed itself, under Margaret's knowing touch, to be a cleverly disguised door. I inserted the key she had given me, turned it with a satisfying click, and pushed. The room beyond was nothing like I expected. Instead of a vault or a safe, I found myself in what appeared to be a private study. Smaller and more intimate than Beatrice's formal office upstairs, but clearly a working space. A desk, 2 comfortable chairs, wall-to-wall bookshelves, and, most surprisingly, a large corkboard covered in photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes. Beatrice called it her truth room, Margaret said, flipping on more lights. where she kept the things she didn't want others to see. I approached the corkboard slowly, my breath catching as I recognized myself in many of the photographs. Me at my college graduation. Me receiving an award. At a conservation conference 3 years ago. Me working in the museum restoration lab, completely unaware I was being photographed. She had me followed? I asked, unsure whether to feel violated or perversely touched by this evidence of Beatrice's attention. Observed, Margaret corrected gently. She wanted to know who you were becoming without her influence. My eyes caught on a news clipping. Museum restorer recovers stolen Modigliani through brilliant detection. The small article detailed how I had noticed inconsistencies in the provenance of a painting brought in for authentication and helped track down its rightful owners, a Jewish family whose art had been looted during World War II. She was proud of you for that, Margaret said, following my gaze. She told me it showed. Integrity and intelligence. Refusing the commission and doing the right thing instead. I turned away from the board, uncomfortable with the idea of Beatrice's surveillance, however well-intentioned. What exactly am I looking for here, Margaret? She wheeled herself to the desk and opened the center drawer, removing a leather-bound journal and a USB drive. Her private thoughts and her private records. The journal covers the last 10 years. The drive contains evidence she collected about certain irregularities she discovered within Caldwell Holdings. Irregularities? Margaret's expression turned grave. Daniel has been embezzling from the company for at least 3 years. Victoria has been selling corporate secrets to competitors. Beatrice discovered both betrayals about a year ago. I stared at her in shock. Why didn't she confront them? Fire them? Press charges? Because Beatrice played the long game. She wanted to understand the full extent of their schemes first. And perhaps, Margaret hesitated, perhaps she wanted to give them a chance to redeem themselves, to choose honesty over greed. But they didn't, I guessed. No, they grew bolder, thinking she was too old or distracted to notice. Margaret handed me the journal and USB drive. This is your leverage, Sophia. Use it wisely. I took them reluctantly. I'm not sure I want to wage war against my own family. They declared war the moment they decided to betray Beatrice, Margaret replied sharply. And make no mistake, they will come for you with everything they have. Daniel has already called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow. He'll try to challenge your competence to lead the company. My stomach twisted with anxiety. He's not wrong. I know nothing about running a corporation this size. You know more than you think. And you have something neither Daniel nor Victoria possesses. When I looked at her questioningly, she smiled. A moral compass. I sank into one of the chairs, suddenly overwhelmed. Why me, Margaret? Really? Was it just to punish them? Margaret considered the question carefully. Partly, yes. Beatrice was not above retribution. But more than that, I think she saw in you the person she might have been had life taken a different turn. She gestured at the corkboard. Look at what you've accomplished. You preserve beauty. You right historical wrongs. You, build rather than destroy. Restoring art is a far cry from running a billion-dollar company, I pointed out. Perhaps. But both require vision. The ability to see what others miss. Both require patience and precision. And both, when done well, create something that outlasts us all. She wheeled closer, her eyes intent on mine. Beatrice built her empire through fear. You have the chance to rebuild it through respect. Before I could respond, Margaret's phone buzzed. She checked it and frowned. Security alert. Someone's entered the house through the main entrance. My heart raced. Who? Unknown. But only family has the access codes. She quickly wheeled toward the hidden door. We should go. Take the journal and drive. Study them tonight. Be prepared for tomorrow. We slipped back. Through the wine cellar, just as voices echoed from above. I recognized Daniel's angry tone and Victoria's sharp responses, though I couldn't make out their words. They're looking for something, Margaret whispered. Probably the same things I just gave you. We took the service elevator up to the kitchen and then moved silently toward the back entrance. Just as we reached the door, the lights flicked on. Well, well, what have we here? Daniel stood in the doorway, Victoria beside him. Both looked surprised to find us, but Daniel quickly masked it with a sneer. Breaking and entering, Sophia? That's hardly becoming of Caldwell Holdings' new CEO. I straightened my shoulders, clutching my bag with the journal and USB drive inside. It's not breaking and entering when you own the property, Daniel. What are you doing here? Victoria stepped forward, her eyes darting between Margaret and me suspiciously. We came to pay our respects to Mother's memory, The real question is what you're doing skulking around with her secretary at midnight. Personal assistant? Margaret corrected coolly. And Ms. Reynolds asked for my help familiarizing herself with the property she now owns. Daniel's gaze fixed on my bag. What have you got there? More of your grandmother's manipulations? Personal effects, I said, meeting his stare. And yes, they are manipulative. She was a Caldwell after all. But they're also mine now. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. We'll see about that. The board meeting tomorrow should be quite illuminating. I hope you're prepared to justify why an art restorer with no business experience should run a multi-billion-dollar corporation. I'll manage, I replied, more confidently than I felt. After all, I've had an excellent education in watching what not to do from certain family members. Victoria gasped at the implied insult, but Margaret intervened before the confrontation could escalate further. It's late, and we all have a significant day ahead of us tomorrow. Perhaps we should continue this discussion at a more appropriate time. Daniel stepped aside, allowing us passage, but as I moved past him, he grabbed my arm, leaning close to whisper, "You're playing a game you don't understand, cousin. Walk away now, and I might let you keep the million Beatrice left you as a consolation prize. Fight me, and you'll lose. Everything." I pulled my arm free, fear mixing with a sudden, surprising anger. I didn't ask for this fight, Daniel, but I'm not walking away from it either. As Margaret and I left through the service entrance, I could feel their eyes burning into my back. Two people who had expected to inherit the world and instead found themselves outmaneuvered by the grandmother they thought they had fooled. "They'll be coming after those documents now," Margaret said as we reached the street. "You need to keep them safe." I nodded, my mind already racing ahead to tomorrow's confrontation. "I will. And Margaret, thank you for everything." She smiled, the expression softening her severe features. "Beatrice wasn't always right, but in choosing you, I believe she was." As I walked away, clutching the evidence of my family's betrayals close to my chest, I wondered if Beatrice had orchestrated all of this from the beginning, creating a stage for one final, spectacular drama in which we were all merely players following her script. If so, what was my role supposed to be? Avenger? Reformer? Or something else entirely? Something even Beatrice hadn't anticipated? Tomorrow I would have to start figuring that out. The Caldwell Holdings headquarters dominated the Boston skyline, 60 floors of steel and glass rising like a modern obelisk above the harbor. I'd passed it countless times, but never entered, never belonged in that world of power suits and corner offices. Yet here I was, stepping through the revolving doors into the vast marble lobby with Gregory at my side. Security personnel discreetly tracked our progress, and employees stopped mid-conversation to stare as we crossed to the executive elevators. News travels fast in corporate kingdoms. "The board meeting starts at 10, Gregory said as we ascended to the top floor. "Daniel has been making calls all night. At least 4 directors are firmly in his camp." I'd spent the night studying the journal and files from Beatrice's hidden room, absorbing decades of corporate strategy, family manipulation, and damning evidence of Daniel and Victoria's betrayals. Sleep had been impossible anyway, with my mind racing through every possible scenario for the day ahead. "And the other 5 directors?" I asked, straightening the lapels of my charcoal suit. The most expensive piece of clothing I'd ever purchased rushed from alterations this morning. "2 are loyal to Beatrice's vision and will likely support you. 3 are waiting to see which way the wind blows." The elevator slowed to a stop. "Remember what we discussed. You don't need to prove you know everything about the business today. You just need to show them you're capable of learning." The doors opened onto an elegant reception area where Margaret waited, impeccable, despite the early hour. She handed me a tablet displaying the latest financial reports. "Daniel arrived 30 minutes ago with Victoria and their lawyers," she murmured. "They're already inside with the board." I checked my reflection in a nearby glass panel, my dark hair pulled back severely. Minimal makeup, expression composed despite the anxiety churning beneath. Not a hint of the terrified imposter I felt like. "Ready?" Gregory asked. I nodded, though ready was the last thing I felt. The boardroom doors opened to reveal a scene straight from a corporate drama. 9 directors seated around a massive table, Daniel at the far end in what had been Beatrice's chair, Victoria beside him. Lawyers lined the walls like expensive sentries. All conversation halted as I entered. "Ms. Reynolds," said Howard Fletcher, the board's senior member, rising to greet me. "We were just discussing the unusual circumstances of your appointment." Daniel didn't bother standing. We were discussing the legal and practical implications of allowing an unqualified outsider to take control of a $4 billion corporation. I met his gaze across the table. I may be many things, Daniel, but I'm hardly an outsider. I'm Beatrice Caldwell's granddaughter, whether you've chosen to acknowledge that relationship or not. Blood means nothing without experience, Victoria cut in. What do you know about corporate finance? International shipping regulations? Real estate development? Less than you, I conceded, taking a seat at the opposite end from Daniel. For now. Howard cleared his throat. The immediate question before this board is whether to honor Beatrice's will or to petition for alternative leadership during a transition period. Daniel has proposed that he serve as interim CEO while Ms. Reynolds acclimates to the business. I could see from several directors' expressions that they found this reasonable, even generous. Daniel had positioned himself as the pragmatic solution to a disruptive problem. Before you decide, I said, opening the leather portfolio I'd brought, you should be aware of certain facts. I removed copies of documents from Beatrice's files. These are financial records showing systematic embezzlement from Caldwell Holdings over the past 3 years. The amounts total more than $12 million. The room went utterly still. I pushed the documents toward Howard. You'll note the money was routed through shell companies registered in Daniel's wife's maiden name. Beatrice discovered the theft last year, but chose to monitor it rather than confront Daniel immediately. Daniel's face flushed dark red. This is slander. I don't know what forgeries you've concocted. They're not forgeries, Mr. Caldwell, Gregory said calmly. The originals have already been authenticated by forensic accountants. Copies have been sent to the SEC as a precautionary measure. Victoria laughed nervously. This is absurd. Even if there were financial irregularities, which I doubt, what proof could you possibly have that Daniel was involved? I turned to her, feeling strangely calm now that the battle had begun. The same proof that shows you've been selling proprietary information to Meridian Global for approximately 18 months. I distributed another set of documents. Emails, bank transfers, meeting recordings. Beatrice was very thorough in her investigation. The boardroom erupted into chaos. Directors talking over each other, lawyers huddling with their clients, Howard Fletcher examining the documents. With increasing alarm, Daniel stood, fists braced against the table. This is a setup, he snarled. Beatrice was senile at the end. She manufactured this evidence to justify cutting us out. The SEC and FBI can determine that, I replied evenly. I've scheduled meetings with both next week. It was a bluff. I hadn't contacted any authorities yet, but Daniel's face told me he believed it. Victoria had gone deathly pale. What do you want? She asked quietly. I looked around the table at the directors, who were watching this family drama unfold with expressions ranging from shock to calculation. These people controlled thousands of jobs, billions in assets, decisions that affected entire communities. They needed leadership, not vengeance. I want what Beatrice wanted, I said finally. A strong, ethical company that honors its legacy while adapting to the future. I don't want to destroy anyone, not even those who betrayed Beatrice's trust. I turned back to Daniel and Victoria. But I will not allow that betrayal to continue. Howard cleared his throat. Given these revelations, I believe the board needs to reconsider its position. He glanced at Daniel. And perhaps certain members should recuse themselves pending investigation. Daniel's lawyer immediately began protesting, but the damage was done. I could see the shift in the room, calculations being revised, allegiances reconsidered. Several directors were already distancing themselves physically from Daniel, a subtle but telling move. I propose, I said into the tension, that we take a brief recess. When we return, I'd like to present my vision for Caldwell Holdings' future, one that includes roles for every member of this board who operates with integrity and commitment to the company's values. Howard nodded gratefully. Excellent suggestion. We'll reconvene in 30 minutes. As people filed out, Daniel remained frozen in place, his expression a storm of fury and disbelief, when only he, Victoria, and I remained. He finally spoke. You think you've won. This isn't about winning, Daniel. It's about honoring Beatrice's legacy. Victoria gave a bitter laugh. God, you sound just like her, self-righteous until the end. I gathered my papers, feeling their eyes on me. You both had everything. Her approval, her trust, her affection. Things I never received. And you threw it away for what? A few million more that you didn't need? Secrets sold to boost your ego? Was it worth it? Don't pretend you know us, Daniel snapped. You were never part of this family. No, I agreed, heading for the door. But I am now. And unlike you, I intend to earn my place in it. I walked out, closing the door on their stunned faces, and found Gregory waiting in the corridor. That went better than expected, he said, falling into step beside me. It's not over, I replied, my confident facade beginning to crack now that we were alone. They'll fight back. They'll challenge the evidence, claim it's fabricated, and they have allies I don't even know about yet. True, Gregory acknowledged as we entered a private office he'd arranged for me. But you've bought yourself time. And in business, that's often all you need. Margaret was already there, tablets and folders arranged precisely on the desk. Well done, she said, studying my face. Beatrice would have been proud. The words struck me more deeply than I expected. All those years of seeking approval I never received. And now, ironically, I might finally be earning it after her death. I need to prepare for the second half of the meeting, I said, pushing the thought aside. Can you pull together the quarterly reports from the tech division? Daniel seemed most protective of those projects. As they set to work, I stared out at the Boston skyline. The city spread before me like a kingdom I never sought to rule. Somewhere out there was my small apartment with its easels and restoration tools. My simple, satisfying life that now felt like a distant memory. For the first time since Beatrice's funeral, I allowed myself to wonder, was this inheritance a gift or a curse? Freedom or a gilded cage? And was I becoming more like Beatrice with each decision I made? The thought was both comforting and terrifying. The remainder of the board meeting proceeded with a tense civility. Daniel and Victoria, on advice from their lawyers, said little, while I presented a measured vision for the company's future that emphasized continuity with strategic innovation. By the end, I'd secured tentative support from 7 directors, enough to begin my leadership without immediate challenge. But as weeks passed, I discovered that running Caldwell Holdings was like navigating a labyrinth, where the walls constantly shifted. For EU, every ally I found, a new enemy emerged from the shadows. For every problem I solved, 3 more appeared in its place. The company was vast, complex, and riddled with loyalties I couldn't map and histories I didn't know. Daniel and Victoria had formally stepped back from operations pending investigation, but their influence lingered like a ghost in every conference room. Employees watched me with wary eyes, uncertain whether to hedge their bets or commit to the new regime. The press alternately portrayed me as a Cinderella story or an unqualified nepotism case, depending on the day's narrative. I worked 18-hour days trying to absorb decades of corporate knowledge, returning each night to my apartment, which I'd refused to leave for Beatrice's mansion, exhausted and increasingly isolated. My friends from my former life didn't know how to relate to me anymore. My new colleagues kept a professional distance. Even Gregory and Margaret, for all their support, maintained the boundaries of their roles. 1 month into my tenure, I sat alone in my office reviewing acquisition proposals for a tech startup when my assistant announced an unexpected visitor. James Chen is here to see you. He says it's personal, not business. The name meant nothing to me. I don't think I know a James Chen. He says he's Margaret Chen's grandson. Curious, I agreed to the meeting. A moment later, a man about my age entered. Tall, with intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses, and an informal ease that stood out in the buttoned-up corporate environment. Ms. Reynolds, he said, extending his hand. Thanks for seeing me without an appointment. Call me Sophia, please. Any relation to Margaret is welcome here. I gestured to a chair. Though I'm surprised we haven't met before. James settled into the seat with a casual grace. My grandmother keeps her professional and personal lives very separate, a habit from working with Beatrice, I imagine. He glanced around the office, which I'd redesigned to be less intimidating than Beatrice's dark wood and leather aesthetic. Nice changes. Less evil overlord, more actual human. I laughed, the sound surprising me after weeks of corporate formality. That was the goal. Though some directors seem to prefer the evil overlord approach. So I've heard. Grandmother keeps me updated on your progress. He leaned forward slightly. She's, impressed, by the way. Says you're learning faster than she expected. That's good to know. Margaret rarely offered direct praise, another habit from the Beatrice era. But somehow I doubt you came here just to relay compliments. James smiled, a warm expression that reached his eyes. Direct. I like that. He reached into his messenger bag and withdrew a folder. I thought you might be interested in this. It's a report on cultural shifts in corporate governance, focusing on companies that successfully transitioned from traditional hierarchies to more collaborative models while maintaining profitability. I took the folder, surprised. You're in corporate research? Organizational psychology, actually. I consult for companies undergoing major transitions. He shrugged. Family. Business of a sort. Grandmother shaped Caldwell's culture for decades behind the scenes. I just put academic framework around similar work. I flipped through the report, noting his name among the authors. This is remarkably relevant to my current challenges. That's not coincidence. Grandmother mentioned you're trying to change Caldwell's culture without destabilizing its operations. He hesitated. I also thought you might want to talk to someone who isn't angling for advantage or reporting back to the board. The offer caught me off guard. Simple human connection had become rare in my new life. That's perceptive of you. Occupational habit. James smiled again, then glanced at his watch. You probably have another meeting soon. I just wanted to drop this off and introduce myself. As he stood to leave, I made a spontaneous decision. Actually, I was about to take a coffee break. There's a place across the street that makes decent espresso. Would you like to join me? Surprise flickered across his face, followed by genuine pleasure. I'd like that very much. That coffee break stretched to nearly an hour. The first time I'd left the building during work hours since taking over. James was easy to talk to, knowledgeable about business but not entrenched in corporate politics. He asked thoughtful questions and actually listened to the answers. By the time we returned to the office, I felt lighter somehow, reminded that a world existed beyond Caldwell Holdings' walls. We should do this again, James said as we parted in the lobby. My grandmother would say, networking is a crucial business skill. I smiled. Is that what this is? Networking? Among other things. He handed me a business card. Call if you need an outside perspective, or just another coffee break. I watched him leave, the business card a small weight in my hand that somehow felt significant. Over the following weeks, James became an unexpected ally. Our coffee breaks became regular. Occurrences then expanded to lunch meetings and occasional dinners where we discussed everything from corporate strategy to art restoration techniques. He introduced me to other professionals outside the Caldwell orbit, people whose perspectives helped me navigate the complex corporate landscape without becoming consumed by it. More importantly, he reminded me to maintain connections to my former life. When I mentioned missing my restoration work, he suggested incorporating visits to the museum into my schedule. When I complained about the isolation of leadership, he introduced me to a networking group for young executives facing similar challenges. Your grandmother didn't send you to spy on me, did she? I asked one evening as we walked along the harbor after a particularly grueling board meeting. James laughed. Grandmother doesn't need spies. She knows everything through her own mysterious channels. That's not a no. He stopped walking, turning to face me directly. Sophia, I'm here because I want to be. Yes. Grandmother mentioned you might benefit from an outside perspective, but my interest is genuine. In your work and... He paused, his expression turning more serious. In you. The admission hung between us, neither fully professional nor purely personal. That's complicated, I said finally. My whole life is complicated right now. I know. He started walking again, giving me space to process. And I'm not trying to add to that complexity, just letting you know where I stand. We walked in companionable silence for a while, the lights of Boston Harbor, reflecting on the dark water. The cool evening air cleared my head, helping me see beyond the immediate crises that had consumed my days. I've been thinking about reorganizing the charitable foundation, I said eventually. Beatrice used it mainly for tax advantages and social positioning. I want it to have real impact. James nodded. Good instinct. The foundation could be your laboratory for culture change. Less entrenched interests to fight, more direct community engagement. Exactly. But I need someone to lead it who understands both nonprofit work and corporate dynamics. I glanced at him. Someone not already tangled in Caldwell politics. He caught my meaning immediately. Are you offering me a job, Ms. Reynolds? A collaboration, I clarified. Your consulting firm would restructure and redirect the foundation's mission. You'd report directly to me, bypassing the usual channels. Clever, you get fresh perspective without directly challenging the old guard. He considered the proposal. It would mean working closely together. Too complicated? I asked, echoing our earlier exchange. James smiled. I can handle complicated. The question is whether Caldwell Holdings can handle real change. It doesn't have a choice, I said, more firmly than I'd intended. Not anymore. As we turned back toward the city lights, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Beatrice's funeral. Certainty. Not about everything. The path ahead remained dauntingly unclear, but about the next step, and sometimes that was enough. When I returned to the office the next morning, I found an envelope on my desk. Inside was a formal complaint filed by Daniel and Victoria, challenging my fitness as CEO on grounds of inexperience and improper influence. They were making their move. But this time, I wasn't facing them alone. 6 months after Beatrice's funeral, Caldwell Holdings held its annual shareholders meeting at the Ashford Conference Center. The same golden hall that had witnessed my grandmother's memorial service was now transformed into a corporate arena, with shareholders, board members, and media representatives gathered to witness what many expected to be my public downfall. Daniel and Victoria had timed their challenge perfectly. They'd spent months building their case, gathering allies, and whispering about my incompetence to anyone who would listen. The formal complaint they'd filed had expanded into a comprehensive campaign to oust me as CEO, culminating in today's shareholder vote. I stood backstage, reviewing my presentation one last time. My hands were steady, but my heart raced beneath my carefully chosen outfit. A navy blue suit that projected authority without aggression. "They've packed the room with sympathetic reporters," James said, joining me with a tablet displaying the attendee list. In the months since our first coffee meeting, he had become not just an ally but something more, a partnership I was still defining but increasingly relied upon. And Victoria's been working the major institutional investors since dawn. "Let her," I replied, more calmly than I felt. "We've prepared for this." And we had. For months, I'd been implementing changes throughout Caldwell Holdings, subtle at first, then increasingly bold. The charitable foundation, under James's guidance, had been transformed from a tax shelter into a genuine force for community development. Key divisions had been restructured to eliminate waste and increase transparency. Old partnerships that had existed primarily as favors had been replaced with more equitable relationships. Most importantly, I'd built my own network of allies, not through intimidation as Beatrice had done, or manipulation as Daniel and Victoria had attempted, but through demonstrated competence and clear vision. Gregory appeared at my side, his usual calm, somewhat strained. "5 minutes, Sophia. The board members are taking their places. Any last-minute defections?" He shook his head. "They're holding steady, but Daniel seems awfully confident." Margaret wheeled herself over, her expression unreadable. "He's planning something. I've never seen him this composed before a confrontation." James squeezed my shoulder gently. "Whatever he's planning, we'll handle it. Remember, you've earned your place here." I nodded, took a deep breath, and walked onto the stage. The lights were blinding at first, the audience a sea of expectant faces. I recognized key players immediately. Howard Fletcher representing the old guard of the board, Eliza Kwan from our largest institutional investor, reporters from the Wall Street Journal and Financial Times in the front row. And there, in seats reserved for family, Daniel and Victoria, both looking polished and inexplicably confident. "Good morning," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the hall. "Welcome to Caldwell Holdings' annual shareholders meeting. Before we proceed to the formal agenda, I'd like to address the recent developments that I know are on everyone's minds." For the next 20 minutes, I presented a comprehensive overview of the company's performance under my leadership. Increased profitability in key sectors, strategic repositioning in emerging markets, enhanced corporate governance standards. The numbers spoke for themselves. Caldwell Holdings was stronger now than it had been a year ago. I concluded with our vision for the future, ambitious but grounded, ethical yet profitable. When I finished, the applause was stronger than I'd anticipated. Even some of Daniel's allies seemed impressed. Then it was his turn. Daniel strode to the podium with practiced confidence. "Very impressive, Sophia. You've clearly been working hard these past months, but leadership isn't just about short-term results or philanthropic window dressing." He launched into his own presentation, highlighting perceived weaknesses in my strategy and emphasizing the value of experience and tradition. It was well-crafted and delivered with conviction, but contained few surprises, until the end. "While my cousin has been playing CEO, she's been keeping secrets of her own," Daniel said, his voice dropping conspiratorially. "Secrets that call into question her judgment and her integrity." A murmur ran through the audience. Victoria smiled smugly from her seat. "For months, Sophia has been engaged in an undisclosed personal relationship with a consultant to whom she has diverted millions in foundation funds, without proper oversight or competitive bidding. Daniel gestured toward James in the front row. James Chen, grandson of Beatrice Caldwell's personal assistant, received contracts worth over $4 million at Sophia's direct instruction. Their relationship extends well beyond professional boundaries, as these photographs demonstrate. On the screen appeared images of James and me, walking along the harbor, dining together, entering my apartment building late at night. Nothing scandalous, but presented in this context, undeniably suggestive of impropriety. The room erupted in whispers. I stood perfectly still, refusing to show reaction though my mind raced. This was Daniel's trap, not attacking my competence, which he couldn't credibly challenge given our recent results, but attacking my character and judgment. Furthermore, Daniel continued over the growing noise, Ms. Reynolds has been systematically removing long-standing board members and executives who question her decisions, replacing them with inexperienced loyalists. This is not leadership. This is a coup wrapped in the veneer of reform. He turned to face me directly. The board has called for a vote of confidence today. I urge all shareholders to consider whether Caldwell Holdings can afford another 6 months of such impulsive, self-serving leadership. The moderator stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable. Ms. Reynolds, would you like to respond before we proceed to the scheduled vote? The room fell silent, all eyes on me. I could feel the weight of judgment, not just on my leadership, but on my character. This was what Daniel had been planning. A character assassination designed to trigger the morality clause in my inheritance agreement. I approached the podium slowly, scanning the audience. Some faces showed sympathy, others curiosity, many calculation. What happened in the next few minutes would determine not just my future, but the future of everything Beatrice had built. Thank you for the opportunity to address these allegations, I began, my voice steadier than I expected. First, let me be clear. All contracts awarded to James Chen's firm were fully documented, competitively priced, and approved by the Foundation's independent board. The complete records are available for review by any shareholder. I paused, looking directly at Daniel. As for my personal relationships, yes, James Chen and I have developed a friendship that has occasionally extended beyond business hours. I don't apologize for that. Leaders are not meant to be isolated figures, cut off from human connection. The audience seemed uncertain how to react. This wasn't the defensive denial they'd expected. But since we're discussing personal relationships and their impact on business judgments, perhaps we should be comprehensive. I nodded to Gregory, who transmitted data to the main screen. These are records of offshore accounts established by Daniel Caldwell 3 years ago, initially funded with embezzled corporate funds. Daniel's face flushed dark red. This is slander. Those allegations were dismissed. The internal investigation was inconclusive, I corrected, but the evidence remained in Beatrice's private files. I chose not to pursue charges at that time, hoping family matters could be resolved privately. I advanced to the next slide. These are communications between Victoria Sinclair Caldwell and our competitors at Meridian Global, sharing proprietary information in exchange for personal compensation. Victoria half rose from her seat, then sank back down as several shareholders turned to stare at her. I didn't make this public 6 months ago because I believed in the possibility of redemption, I continued. I offered both Daniel and Victoria paths to make amends, reduced roles with appropriate oversight, restitution plans without public disclosure. They refused, choosing instead to undermine the company from within while planning this attack. The room had gone completely silent. Even the journalists had stopped typing, transfixed by the unfolding drama. Caldwell Holdings deserves leadership that prizes integrity above personal gain, leadership that builds rather than exploits, leadership that honors the past while embracing the future. I straightened my shoulders. If you believe I've failed to provide that leadership, vote accordingly, but do so based on facts, not innuendo. I stepped back from the podium, my heart pounding but my expression composed. Daniel rushed forward, face contorted with fury. You self-righteous. That's enough, Mr. Caldwell. Howard Fletcher interrupted, rising from his seat. The accusations on both sides are serious and require proper investigation. I move that we postpone the confidence vote pending full review of all evidence presented today. Several board members nodded agreement. Daniel looked around wildly, realizing his carefully orchestrated moment was slipping away. No, I said clearly, surprising everyone. The vote should proceed as scheduled. This company needs clarity, not prolonged uncertainty. Howard looked at me with newfound respect. Are you certain, Ms. Reynolds? The allegations against you, while seemingly addressed, may still influence some shareholders. I'm certain, I replied. Caldwell Holdings is stronger than any individual, including me. If the shareholders lack confidence in my leadership, I need to know that today, not. After weeks of damaging speculation, the vote proceeded electronically. Results tabulated in real time, but hidden until completion. Those 5 minutes were the longest of my life. I stood still on the stage, aware of cameras capturing every nuance of my expression, refusing to show the anxiety churning beneath my calm exterior. Finally, the results appeared on the main screen. Confidence in CEO. Sophia Reynolds, yes, 68.7%. No, 31.3%. A clear victory, not unanimous, but decisive. The audience broke into applause, genuine this time, rather than polite. Howard Fletcher was the first to approach me, hand extended in congratulation. Well played, he said quietly. Beatrice would have been proud. As the crowd surged forward, I caught glimpses of Daniel and Victoria slipping out a side door, their faces masks of defeat and fury. This battle was over, but the war would continue. They still had resources, connections, and the motivation of humiliation to fuel their next attack. But for now, at least, I had won the right to continue Beatrice's legacy, though perhaps not exactly as she had envisioned it. James found me as the crowd began to disperse, his expression a mix of pride and, concern. That was magnificent, he said, and terrifying. It was necessary, I replied, suddenly exhausted as the adrenaline drained away. But not something I want to repeat anytime soon. He smiled. No more secret photos of harbor walks? No more pretending our relationship needs to be hidden to be proper, I corrected, though the timing is still complicated. I can handle complicated, he reminded me, echoing our conversation from months ago. As we left the Golden Hall together, I caught sight of Margaret watching us, a small smile on her face. She nodded once. Approval, acknowledgement, perhaps even blessing. The future remained uncertain, filled with challenges I was still learning to navigate. But for the first time since Beatrice's funeral, I felt I was walking my own path, not merely following the one she had laid out for me. That alone was victory enough for today. 1 year to the day after Beatrice's funeral, I stood alone in the hidden room behind the wine cellar. The corkboard that had once displayed evidence of her surveillance now held different items: newspaper clippings about Caldwell Holdings' transformation, photos of community projects launched by our revitalized foundation, notes from employees whose lives had been improved by our new policies. A different kind of legacy, built on the foundations she had left me. The past year had been a crucible of challenges and changes. After the shareholders' meeting, Daniel and Victoria had retreated but not surrendered, launching a series of legal challenges to my leadership. Each had failed, but the battles had been exhausting and expensive. Meanwhile, I'd continued the work of reshaping Caldwell Holdings, maintaining its financial strength while redefining its values and purpose. We'd divested from environmentally damaging projects, invested in emerging technologies with social benefits, and established transparent governance structures that would outlast any individual leader. I'd also maintained connections to my former life, spending 1 day each month at the museum restoration lab as a volunteer. Those quiet hours with damaged artworks in need of careful attention had become my sanctuary, a reminder of who I had been before inheritance had changed everything. A soft knock interrupted my reflections. Margaret entered, her wheelchair humming quietly on the polished floor. "I thought I might find you here," she said, surveying the transformed room. "Beatrice used to come here on significant anniversaries, too." I smiled. "Still keeping tabs on me after all this time?" "Old habits," she admitted without apology. "Though these days, I get most of my information from James." My relationship with her grandson had evolved over the year, from professional ally to trusted advisor to something much more personal. We'd finally stopped pretending our dinners were business meetings, our weekend conversations strategic planning. The press still occasionally implied impropriety, but we'd learned to ignore the noise. "How is retirement treating you?" I asked, noting how much more relaxed she looked since stepping down as my assistant 6 months ago. "Surprisingly well, though I still maintain certain information channels." Her eyes twinkled with mischief. "For instance, I know that Daniel has finally accepted that position in London." This was news to me. Really? After all his declarations about fighting to the bitter end? The bitter end arrived when the SEC investigation concluded last month. He's lucky to avoid criminal charges. She adjusted her glasses. "Victoria, I hear, is divorcing her husband and moving to Palm Beach. Apparently, scandal is less noticeable there. I felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that the family warfare might finally be subsiding. Sadness for what might have been had we all made different choices. Do you think they'll ever find peace with how things turned out? Margaret considered the question. Carefully. Daniel might, eventually. Victoria harbors grudges too deeply, like Beatrice in that way. She paused. Speaking of Beatrice, that's actually why I came looking for you. I found something while clearing out my old files, something I think she would want you to have today. She reached into her bag and withdrew a small, ornately carved wooden box. She gave this to me 23 years ago after your mother died. Said I should keep it safe until the time was right. My hands trembled slightly as I took the box. The wood was warm, polished by decades of handling. When I opened it, I found a collection of items that stole my breath. Photographs of my mother as a young woman, laughing beside Beatrice. Letters in my mother's handwriting. A delicate silver bracelet I recognized from me. Childhood memories. She kept these, all this time. Margaret nodded. Beatrice rarely showed her heart, but that doesn't mean she didn't have one. She loved your mother fiercely, even through their estrangement. And she watched you, Sophia, not just to test you, but because she saw Margaret in you, the daughter she couldn't reconcile with in life. I lifted a photograph of my mother and Beatrice. Standing before the Caldwell mansion, arms linked, both young and full of promise. The affection between them was palpable, captured forever before whatever rifts had torn them apart. Why didn't she tell me? Why the games, the tests, the years of coldness? Pride, Margaret said simply. The great Caldwell curse. Too much pride to admit mistakes, to show vulnerability, to seek forgiveness. She gestured around the room. But look at what you've built from her legacy. You've taken what was broken and made it whole in a new way. A wave of emotion caught me unexpectedly. Grief for the grandmother I'd never truly known, gratitude for the chance she'd given me, determination to continue the work of transformation. There's something else, Margaret said, more hesitantly. A letter she wrote. To you the day before she added the eulogy test to her funeral arrangements. She made me promise not to give it to you unless you'd proven yourself not just capable, but worthy of her legacy. From the box, she withdrew a sealed envelope with my name on it. Unlike the letter I'd received after the funeral, this one was addressed in shaky handwriting. Beatrice near the end of her strength. I'll leave you to read it privately, Margaret said, wheeling toward the door. James is waiting upstairs. We thought you might like company for dinner tonight, given the anniversary. When she was gone, I opened the envelope with careful fingers and unfolded the single page inside. Sophia, if you are reading this, then you have done what I could not. Broken the Caldwell cycle of pride and retribution. I watched your mother destroy herself trying to earn back my approval after I withdrew it. I watched myself become a woman who valued control over connection, power over love. I could not change what I had become, but I could give you the chance to build something better from the ashes of my failures. The company, the wealth, these were just tools. The real inheritance I hoped to give you was the opportunity to choose a different path. You were stronger than I ever was. Strong enough to build your own life when I shut you out. Strong enough to maintain your integrity when tested. Strong enough to see beyond revenge when given power over those who wronged you. I cannot ask for your forgiveness. I do not deserve it, but I can tell you what I never could in life. I am proud of the woman you have become, not because of my influence, but despite it. May you find the peace I never could. Beatrice's tears blurred my vision as I read the letter a second time, then a third. Not tears of grief or anger, but of release. The final untying of a knot that had bound me to Beatrice's approval for as long as I could remember. I carefully returned the letter to its envelope, placed it in the wooden box with my mother's mementos, and closed the lid. These treasures from the past would always be part of me, but they would not define my future. Upstairs, I found James waiting in the kitchen, attempting to decode the elaborate coffee machine with limited success. His face lit up when he saw me, then shifted to concern. Are you okay? You've been crying. I'm good, I said, and meant it. Better than I've been in a long time, actually. He studied my face, then nodded, accepting without pushing for details. That was one of the things I loved about him. His respect for boundaries balanced with genuine care. I thought we might try that new restaurant in the South End, he suggested. Unless you'd prefer something quieter. I considered the options. A quiet evening remembering the past, or a step forward into the noise and vibrancy of life continuing. The choice seemed suddenly obvious. The new place sounds perfect, I said. But first, I need to show you something. I led him to Beatrice's formal office on the second floor, a space I'd barely touched since inheriting the house, feeling it belonged more to her ghost than to me. I've been thinking about this room for months, I explained, surveying the heavy furniture and somber decor that had intimidated generations of Caldwells. It's time for a change. James looked around thoughtfully. What kind of change? I'm donating her desk to the Massachusetts Historical Society. They've been asking about it. Apparently, it's a significant piece from the federal period. I ran my hand along the polished surface where Beatrice had made countless decisions, signed countless documents. The rest I'm having redesigned into a collaborative workspace. For Caldwell Holdings business? I shook my head. For the Foundation's new youth arts program. I want this room filled with creativity instead of intimidation, light instead of shadows. I turned to face him directly. What do you think? His smile was answer enough, but he added, I think Beatrice would be horrified and impressed in equal measure. Good, I said, laughing. That feels exactly right. As we left the mansion together, I paused at the threshold, looking back at the grand foyer with its crystal chandelier and marble floors. For a moment, I could almost see Beatrice standing at the top of the stairs, watching with that inscrutable expression that had defined my childhood. But the vision faded, replaced by the reality of empty space waiting to be filled with new purpose, new memories, new life. Outside, Boston sparkled in the early evening light, the future spreading before us in all its complicated, beautiful potential. I had inherited wealth, power, responsibility, but the greatest inheritance had been the chance to define legacy on my own terms. Not gold and silence, but truth and connection. Not fear and control, but respect and purpose. Not the past with its burdens, but the future with its possibilities. I took James's hand as we walked toward the waiting car, leaving the golden shadows of Beatrice's world behind. Some inheritances are measured in dollars, others in the courage to create something new from what was broken. I had finally claimed both.